Hi, my name's Daniel. My wife gave me a choice: disappear or give her everything. The house, the cars, the business I built from nothing. And when I asked, what about our son, our depressed teenage son, she looked me in the eye and said, he's not my problem. My own family told me to fight. Her parents laughed at me in court, called me a washed-up nobody. But the thing is, they never asked what she really took. And they sure as hell didn't know what I'd already protected. What if walking away was never losing? What if everything wasn't what they thought it was? Dinner had already been cleared. The dishwasher hummed with that steady, tired rhythm it always made at the end of the day. A stack of unopened mail sat near the sink, bent slightly from where I'd set my keys down. My son's hoodie was draped over the back of the chair he always used, one sleeve dangling close to the floor like it had slipped there on purpose. I stood at the counter, rinsing a glass I hadn't really used, listening to the house settle. Early fall always did that. Pipes clicking, the faint whistle of air through the window frame. Everything felt normal enough that I didn't brace myself. I didn't raise my guard. I was present, calm, paying attention in the quiet way you do after years of raising a child and managing a household without needing to announce it. She came back into the kitchen carrying a folder. Not a notebook, not loose papers, a folder, thick, the kind you buy when you already know you'll need sections. Tabs stuck out along the side, color-coded. Yellow highlights visible through the clear plastic cover. She set it on the table, careful not to slide it, like the placement mattered. "We should talk," she said. I didn't sit right away. I looked at the folder first, at the weight of it, at how flat it landed, as if it belonged there. I asked, "Is something wrong?" She exhaled, not sharply, practiced. "This doesn't have to be dramatic." That's when it registered. This wasn't a conversation. It was a delivery. I pulled out the chair and sat. The folder stayed between us like a third presence. When I opened it, the smell of fresh ink hit me. Everything inside was printed cleanly, labeled final. I recognized the format from years of running a company. This was execution, not discussion. Twist S1 didn't arrive with a bang. It settled in quietly. The terms had already been decided before I touched the paper. She leaned back and folded her arms. "You have options," she said, as if that softened it. Then she laid them out in one breath. $7 million. Or the company, or the house and the cars. Assets divided cleanly, efficiently. And then the last line, delivered with the same tone as the rest. "And I don't want you in my life anymore." Disappear, that was the shape of it. Not separation, not distance, erasure. I felt something tighten behind my ribs, but it wasn't panic. It wasn't even anger. It was calculation. Years of decisions flicked on like a switch. What this would cost, what could be protected, what couldn't. I thought about our son before I thought about myself. She followed my eyes as they drifted down the hallway toward his room. The door was half closed. Light spilled out in a thin line across the floor. He was inside, probably pretending to do homework while his thoughts ran faster than his pencil. She made a small motion with her hand, almost dismissive. "He's not my problem," she said. Twist S2 didn't feel like shock. It felt like something breaking cleanly in two. For a moment, I couldn't draw air into my lungs. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice the absence. That sentence cut through everything else she'd said. Money lost meaning. Property turned hollow. Something irreversible had been crossed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I stayed exactly where I was and looked at her as if I were seeing her for the first time, without the story I'd been telling myself for years. I closed the folder, slowly, carefully. I didn't sign anything. I didn't push it back to her either. I left it where it was, sealed and waiting. My eyes drifted back to the chair, to the hoodie. I didn't reach for it. I let it stay exactly as it was. I need time, I said. She shrugged, already done with the moment. Later, when the house went quiet again, I stood alone in the kitchen. The folder sat untouched. The dishwasher clicked off. The hoodie still hung there, patient. I didn't argue that night. I just asked myself one question I wasn't ready to answer yet, feeling long after the house went quiet. It had that kind of stillness that didn't soothe. It just pressed on your chest, the kind that made the air feel too thick. No ticking clock, no TV in the background, just silence and the weight of what she said. She didn't sleep in our room. I heard her close the guest room door down the hall about an hour after we spoke. No words, no checking on our son, no turning back, just the sound of the latch, final and unbothered. I stayed in the kitchen, didn't turn off the light, didn't go upstairs. I sat there for I don't know how long, still in the same chair. The folder untouched, that line still echoing louder than anything else. He's not my problem. Not the house, not the business, not the money. That sentence, it was the sharp edge of everything. Around 2 a.m., I got up. The fridge hummed. The heating kicked on with a clunk. I moved slowly, not because I was tired, but because rushing made it real. And I wasn't ready for that yet. I walked down the hallway and stopped outside my son's room. The door creaked when I pushed it open gently. He was lying on his side, facing the wall, covers pulled halfway up. I could tell by the way his breathing changed that he was awake. I stepped in and sat on the edge of the bed. "You sleeping?" I asked softly. "No," he mumbled, then added, "I was. Sorry, just wanted to check on you." He shrugged without turning. "I'm fine." "School okay today?" "Yeah. Anything coming up this week?" "Just math test Thursday." We both knew it wasn't about school, but that was the language we used. Easy words, safe ones. And he used them like he'd learned to, like he'd practiced them for years. Twist S5 wasn't in what he said. It was in how he said it. Careful, polite, dull on purpose. I placed my hand on his shoulder. He didn't move, just stayed still. "I'm here," I said. He nodded once. "I know." I sat with him a minute longer, then stood. "Sleep if you can. I'll be up for a while." I closed the door behind me, gently, and walked out to the back porch. The night air had a snap to it, fall creeping in for real. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the screen for a moment before dialing. It rang twice, then her voicemail picked up. She hadn't even let it go all the way. Just straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, just checking if you actually meant what you said about your own son?" No. That silence was deliberate. Twist S3 didn't come with shouting. It came with nothing. Nothing at all. No answer. No callback. Just the kind of silence you can't pretend was an accident. I stood out there for a long time, letting the cold settle in. I didn't smoke. Never did. But in that moment, I understood why people do. At some point, the sky started to lighten. I went back inside, started coffee, and cracked an egg into a pan just to keep my hands busy. My son padded in quietly, still in pajama pants and a worn hoodie. He grabbed a spoon and leaned against the counter. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Is everything okay?" I turned to look at him. He didn't ask with fear. He asked like he already knew, and just wanted to be reassured that the world wasn't breaking. Not all the way. "It's fine," I lied. "Just grown-up stuff." He nodded, didn't push, stirred his cereal slowly. She came down 10 minutes later, dressed, keys already in hand. No eye contact, no words, just a straight line to the door, and then the sound of it shutting behind her. He didn't watch her go. I did. That moment, him sitting there quietly, chewing, not asking anything else, hit harder than the night before. I realized I wasn't just dealing with divorce papers or custody or finances. I was the only adult left in the room who was still trying to protect something. This wasn't about fighting to win. I wasn't going to lawyer up to destroy her. That wasn't the point. I could feel it like a stone settling in my chest. This was about making sure my son didn't carry the weight of her decision for the rest of his life. He looked up at me and said, "Can we still go hiking Saturday?" I forced a smile. "Absolutely." He nodded again and went back to his cereal like it was just another Wednesday. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. By morning, I understood something clearly. This wasn't the first time my silence had cost me more than money. And left it in the sink. The house had that post-breakfast quiet. My son was already upstairs getting his things ready for school, and the only sound was the occasional creak in the floorboards overhead. I checked the clock, grabbed my keys, and headed for the car. I told myself I was running errands, but I knew I was just looking for air. I didn't take the usual route. I let the car drift onto streets I hadn't driven in years, ones I used to know like the back of my hand, neighborhoods from a different life, side roads that curved through the edges of where I grew up. The farther I went, the quieter my mind became. Familiar trees, the cracked sidewalk near the old high school, gas stations that had changed names but still smelled like oil and burnt coffee. I didn't mean to drive past the house, but I did. The one I spent most of my childhood in. It looked smaller now, like someone had shrunk it just slightly. New cars in the driveway. The porch railing had been replaced. I pulled over a block away and just sat there, engine running. I was the youngest of 3 boys. My oldest brother was the one who always had a plan. He could sell anything, argue his way through anything. My middle brother had that kind of raw charm that made people say, "He's going places." And then there was me, the quiet one, the one who didn't need much. I didn't act out. I didn't ask for things. I filled in the spaces, made things easier. Back then, I wore easy like it was a compliment. Teachers liked me. I got decent grades. I helped out when I was told. And I didn't cause waves when I wasn't. It was survival, not approval. I realize that now. Every family needs one person to carry the weight silently. That person was me. And somewhere along the line, I forgot that silence isn't the same as peace. I kept driving, making turns that didn't need to be made. I stopped for gas even though I still had half a tank. I sat in the parking lot of a hardware store without going inside. I let the hours drift by, thinking about all the ways I'd built my life around being needed but never noticed. In my marriage, it was no different. I'd handled the finances, made sure the bills were paid, showed up to every parent-teacher conference, picked up prescriptions, fixed the back fence, made late-night grocery runs, quietly, steadily. And she liked to shine. She liked to host, to tell stories that made her the center. At dinner parties, she'd introduce me as The Rock, but somehow I never got a thank you when the cleanup was done. Birthdays came and went, anniversaries, business milestones. I was there in every one of them, but not in the pictures, not mentioned in the toasts. There was a moment 2 years ago When our company landed a major contract, the celebration was at our house, and she stood in front of everyone, raised her glass, and said, "I built this from nothing." I was holding our son's jacket at the time, standing just behind the kitchen island. I smiled. I clapped with everyone else. That was the pattern. Twist S6 wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about being used and dismissed over and over, like that was the deal I'd agreed to. And the thing is, I had agreed to it, not out loud, but in the way I allowed it to keep going. That's what hit hardest now. Not that I'd been left, but that I'd made it easy for her to believe I didn't need to be seen. That she could erase me and expect no fight. Twist S8 landed right there, with a thud. I was being written out of my own story while I was still standing in the room. Being low maintenance isn't noble. It's dangerous. It gives people permission to take without asking. That quiet anger started rising. Not loud, not sharp. Just steady. Like pressure building underwater. I'd been polite for too long. Smoothed things over for too long. Took pride in not being difficult. And it hadn't protected me from a damn thing. Back home, I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. The house looked the same as always. My son's bike leaned against the porch. The trash bins were still out at the curb. Life kept moving. But inside me, something had shifted. I thought about the way my son had asked, "Is everything okay?" That gentle question, the careful tone, and how quickly he accepted a half answer. He was watching me. Not just now, but always. Watching how I handled being sidelined, how I reacted to being dismissed. And what lesson was I teaching him by staying silent through all of it? That to be a man is to disappear when it gets hard? That love is something you earn by not asking for too much? I couldn't bear that. I didn't have a plan yet. No speech, no revenge, no legal counterattack. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The man I had been, the man who stayed quiet, he was done. If I stayed quiet again, I wouldn't just lose a marriage. I'd lose my son's respect. Saturday, I was cleaning out the garage, mostly to stay busy, when her mother's name popped up on my phone. The message was short, polite, punctuated with exclamation points that were meant to soften the blow. "We'd love to have you for lunch, just to talk things through. No pressure, of course." I stood there holding a dusty box of extension cords, rereading the text. There was no direct mention of the separation, no acknowledgement of the folder she dropped on the kitchen table. Just the suggestion of lunch, like it was any other weekend afternoon. But I knew better. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons dressed in civility. By the time I arrived at their house the next day, the weather had turned cold and still. I parked in front of their stone-columned porch, sat for a moment, then walked up the steps. The door opened before I could knock. "Glad you could come," her father said. He smiled like this was a business meeting, not a conversation about his daughter divorcing me and turning our son into an afterthought. Inside, the house looked like something from a home and garden magazine. Not a throw pillow out of place. Hardwood floors polished to a mirror. The kind of quiet that feels padded, rehearsed. Her mother handed me tea I didn't ask for. Chamomile. No sugar, no honey. Just like always. We made small talk. They asked about work, the house, our son. I answered, careful, watching how every word landed. Her sister arrived shortly after, all warmth and tight hugs that felt 2 degrees too scripted. It didn't take long for the tone to shift. I caught it first in her father's phrasing. "We just want what's best for everyone." Then her sister chimed in. "It's been hard on all of us." I hadn't said 10 full sentences, but the narrative had already taken shape. My wife's version, carved neatly into everyone's minds. No one asked what I thought. They didn't need to. They had already chosen their side. That was the first crack. Twist S4. They weren't here to listen. They were here to smooth over the edges of a decision already made. My presence was ceremonial. Still, I kept my tone level. I nodded, sipped the tea. The plate of scones between us stayed untouched. The insult came later, so subtle it nearly passed me by. Her mother, smiling gently, leaned in just a little and said, "At this stage in life, knowing when to step aside is a kind of strength, don't you think?" It was said with such grace that for a moment I doubted I'd heard it right. Step aside? As if I was an obstacle in my own family. As if claiming my role as a father was some outdated idea I needed to release with dignity. I didn't respond. I couldn't, not without making a scene, which is exactly what they were prepared for me to do. They were ready for anger, ready to soothe it, but not ready for silence. That was twist S10. The kind of cruelty that doesn't bruise but still cuts. The kind that's sugar-coated, so if you call it out, you seem paranoid. Oversensitive. The problem. I set my tea down slowly. I heard myself say, "Thank you for inviting me." And nothing more. I let them talk. I let them misrepresent. I let them assume I'd bend again. But I watched. I paid attention. I saw how they moved like a team, polished, practiced, not loud, never direct, just enough implication to discredit me without saying anything out loud. In that moment, sitting in their perfectly curated living room, I realized something critical. They didn't expect me to fight back. They expected me to fold like I always had, to keep the peace, to swallow the humiliation quietly. And I might have, once, but not now. Not after what she'd said about our son. Not after realizing the cost of staying invisible. I stood when the conversation naturally wound down. They offered leftovers. I declined. Her father shook my hand, firm but cold. Her mother hugged me briefly, not tightly enough for it to mean anything. Back in the car, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make any calls. I drove in silence, processing every word, every look, every assumption they had wrapped in kindness. On the drive home, I understood their mistake. They thought my silence meant surrender. The drive home was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't calm. It presses against your chest. The highway blurred past, but in my mind, I was still in that polished living room, hearing her mother's voice sweetly tell me I was no longer needed. 2 days later, I signed the lease on a small one-bedroom apartment with beige walls and a carpet that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. The building sat wedged between a laundromat and an insurance office, nothing like the house I'd once come home to. My name was still on that mortgage, at least for now, but that house didn't belong to me anymore. Not really. The new place came mostly unfurnished. I bought a used couch off a guy named Mark who didn't ask questions. I picked up a mismatched set of plates from a thrift store and found a folding table someone had left at the curb with a free sign duct taped to it. My son's mattress sat on the floor of the bedroom. No bed frame yet. I told him it was temporary. He nodded like he believed me. But I knew he didn't. He didn't complain. He never did. That worried me more than anything. Most nights, after he fell asleep, I sat at that folding table and stared at a stack of unopened mail. Legal letters, court dates, financial statements, things that demanded attention I couldn't summon the energy to give. That was when the calls started coming, from my side of the family. My older brother first. "She's gutting you, man." You're just going to sit there and let her? Then, my uncle, you need to stand up for yourself. She'll take everything if you let her. And then, the louder voices. Hire a shark. Drag her through it. Don't make it easy for her. I let them talk. But what none of them asked, what no one ever asked, was how my son was doing. They were so caught up in pride, in appearances, in winning something. They forgot there was a child in the middle of all this, a boy still learning what kind of man his father was. I started to realize something. I was tired. Not of the logistics, not of moving boxes or sleeping in a place that echoed with emptiness. I was tired of explaining myself, of trying to make people understand why I wasn't fighting like they thought I should, why I didn't want to walk into court ready to burn everything down. Because what was there to prove? That I could be louder? Harsher? Meaner? That wasn't power. That was noise. And noise was the one thing my son didn't need more of. The final push came the following Thursday. I had a meeting with my lawyer in a downtown office where everything smelled like stale coffee and cold printer toner. We sat across from each other, a thin file between us, my file. She adjusted her glasses and said, "They're asking for everything. House, primary custody, half your retirement, the cars. I can push back, but you need to tell me where the line is." I stared at the file for a long time. Then I said it. Calm even. No emotion, no heat. "Let her take everything." She blinked. "You sure?" "I am." She waited. People like her are trained to wait, to let the silence pull the truth out. But there was nothing else coming. Because the twist wasn't in what I gave up. It was in what I chose not to destroy. Let her have the house. Let her have the car. Let her fill whatever courtroom she wanted with quiet accusations and highlighted paperwork. I wouldn't play the part they wrote for me, the bitter ex, the defensive man trying to save face. That wasn't my fight. My fight was in smaller things. Picking my son up from school and asking how his day was, even if he only gave me one-word answers. Sitting on the floor with him eating frozen pizza on paper plates because we hadn't unpacked the real ones. Making sure he never saw me unravel, even when I felt like I was. Outside the law office, I stood for a moment before getting into my car. The sky was the dull gray of early November, the kind that steals the warmth out of your hands and the color out of the trees. I knew what everyone would think. That I'd given up, that I was weak, that I'd let her win. Let them think it. What none of them saw, what they never asked, was what I had already protected. That thought stayed with me the next morning as I parked in the courthouse lot, engine still humming. My hands were steady, not calm, steady. The kind of stillness that comes when you've already decided what matters. It was a gray morning, the kind where the clouds hang so low they feel close enough to grab. I took a breath, stepped out of the car, and walked up the steps into a building meant to feel neutral. Stone walls, brushed metal signage, fluorescent lights humming overhead. But buildings don't create neutrality. People do. And I hadn't met a single neutral person yet. Security was routine. Belt off, keys in the tray, phone in the bin. The guard glanced at me and gave a nod that could have meant anything. I walked the long hallway and turned the corner to the waiting area outside courtroom 2B. They were already there, my wife and her parents, dressed for subtle theater. Her father in a beige blazer that whispered country club, her mother in a soft gray sweater and pearls. My wife had her arms crossed loosely, her expression unreadable. She didn't look up. They sat like a team, a practiced one. I didn't sit with them. I found a bench on the opposite wall, pulled out my phone, just to have something to look at. That's when I noticed the email. It had come through 10 minutes earlier, forwarded to me by accident. Or maybe not. Hard to know anymore. The subject line was blank. The message was short. It was a reply to an internal thread, something between my wife and her lawyer, maybe her parents too. I recognized one of the names as a mutual contact. The line that caught me was this: "He doesn't get it. He won't catch it anyway." That was it. No context, no explanation, just the casual dismissal tucked in like a footnote. Like I wasn't even a participant in my own life. Just a detail they didn't expect to be a problem. I didn't react. Not then. I read it twice, then archived it. The bailiff opened the door. "Parties for case 427, Morgan v. Morgan." We all stood. Inside, the room smelled like carpet cleaner and paper. The judge hadn't entered yet, so we took our seats. I sat behind my attorney. My wife sat across the aisle, flanked by her parents like it was still 1993 and she was headed to prom. The clerk clicked her pen. The sound bounced too loud off the walls. Then, laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. But I heard it. Her father leaned over, whispered something to her mother. She tilted her head just slightly and let out a breathy chuckle. My wife's lips curved. Not a smile, not quite, but something knowingly close. That sound sliced sharper than anything they could have said. Because it wasn't about something funny, it was about control. That was the point. Let him hear us laugh. Let him sit there and wonder what the joke is. I felt the flush rise in my neck, the instinctive burn of being the outsider in a room built for appearances. For a split second, I imagined standing up, demanding to know what was so amusing. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. Instead, I studied them, their posture, their timing, the way her father's arm rested protectively along the back of her chair, the way her mother smiled softly, but never met my eyes. It was all a dance they had done before, practiced, polished, and they believed I was still trying to catch up. That's when it shifted. I stopped feeling humiliated and started feeling something else. Distance. Not the kind that hurts, the kind that clarifies. I looked around the courtroom and realized I wasn't in the middle of a war. I was in a play I hadn't written, expected to perform a role I'd already rejected. They weren't improvising. They were sticking to a script that hadn't changed in decades. Wealth equals credibility. Quiet equals guilt. But they'd forgotten one thing. I'd stopped performing. The judge entered and the room rose. Statements began. Names were read into record. My attorney spoke when she needed to. I kept my hands folded, my face still. Not stoic. Present. I thought about the email again. He doesn't get it. They were wrong. I got it now. The email wasn't enough to build a case, not yet. But it was something else. It was a signal, a crack in the polished front, a glimpse behind the curtain. They were confident. Too confident. And that kind of confidence turns careless when it goes unchecked. So I watched. I took note of who spoke and who didn't, who deferred, who asserted, who repeated phrases that sounded rehearsed. I didn't defend myself, not out loud, not yet. But I started listening differently. And that's when the power shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was the moment I realized that winning this wasn't about raising my voice. It was about seeing what others missed while they were too busy performing. That was the day I stopped defending myself and started watching them closely. I didn't tell anyone. Not my lawyer, not my son, not even the mirror. But something shifted in me, subtle and final. The next morning, I got a text from an old friend who still worked downtown. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer. He'd been at a dinner I wasn't invited to, an informal gathering of mutual acquaintances. He didn't say much, just a single sentence. Sounds like she thinks it's already over. I didn't reply right away, just let the words sit there. By noon, 2 more people had reached out. Not to check on me, just to pass along things they'd heard. She's already looking at new places. Her parents toasted at the club this weekend. She said everything's handled. The word I kept hearing was done. They'd declared victory before the ink was dry. I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. It was something else. A low, detached hum of disbelief. Not because they were celebrating, but because they were so confident I'd stay predictable. That afternoon, I sat down with my lawyer again. We were in a glass-walled conference room 12 floors above street level, where you could hear the muffled rumble of city traffic but not see anyone clearly. The whole place smelled like printer paper and weak coffee. He slid a thick manila folder across the table. Preliminary draft. Her team's moving faster than expected. I opened it and started reading. The language was confident, not aggressive, but certain, as if they were simply documenting something already agreed upon. Paragraph after paragraph was built on assumption. Who owned what? Who would take responsibility for what debt? Which parent would make final decisions regarding our son's education? Line by line, I noticed how much was already claimed. Not requested. Claimed. My lawyer leaned back. Notice anything? I nodded slowly. She assumed everything meant assets. Exactly, he said. But it doesn't. What they didn't realize, what she didn't realize, was that in her rush to claim all the visible victories, she'd overlooked the invisible ones, the emotional weight of decisions, the social impressions they carried, the vulnerabilities she'd revealed in writing. They treated the silence I'd maintained like weakness, when it had always been intentional. 2 days later, her team pushed to schedule a final agreement meeting. No mediation, no further negotiation. They were in a hurry now. My attorney raised his eyebrows. You want to stall? I shook my head. No, let's agree, as is. He looked at me like I'd just handed over a loaded gun. You're sure? Yes. We could have objected, could have redlined half the document. But I didn't. Because I didn't need to win this chapter. I needed them to believe they had. I waited. That Friday morning, we all met again, this time in a smaller office downtown, rented conference space for final paperwork. Her parents were there, as always. She wore a soft blue blouse and carried a black folder. Her lawyer smiled too much. They expected resistance. They came prepared for it. But when I nodded through the proposals, signed where they told me, and declined to request additional adjustments, I saw the moment the pressure left her shoulders. Her mother smiled, grateful, almost gracious. Her father said something like, "Glad we could resolve things peacefully." Peacefully. It was a theater, one they thought they directed. I signed the last page and pushed it forward. The room softened. Coffee was poured. Jokes were made. What they didn't notice was that I hadn't spoken more than a dozen words. I didn't need to. I had what I came for, the complete map of their blind spots. Because in every clause they thought was clever, every paragraph they assumed I wouldn't understand, they left traces of arrogance. The way they bundled unrelated items together, the missing acknowledgement of assets only I knew about, the casual exclusion of timelines, dates, disclosures. She thought everything was hers now, but she'd only asked for what she could see. We stepped into the hallway. Her lawyer shook my hand with a little too much cheer. "You've handled this with real grace," he said. I gave a slight nod. "Thank you." Behind him, her father was already talking about dinner reservations. They thought the story was ending, but they hadn't read the last page yet. The morning of the final hearing came without ceremony. I woke up early, before the alarm, before the city had fully stirred. My son was still asleep. The apartment was quiet. I brewed coffee in the small kitchen and drank it standing up, staring out at the pale blue sky smudged with winter clouds. There was nothing left to review, no papers to shuffle, no calls to make. All the pieces were already in play. By the time I stepped into the courthouse lobby, the air smelled like old stone and floor polish, same metal detectors, same tired guards, but something about it felt different. Not smaller, tighter, like the last turn in a narrowing hallway. Outside the courtroom, her lawyer was already laughing with one of the clerks. She stood a few feet away, flipping through a leather folder, tapping her heel softly against the tile. Her parents were seated on the bench near the wall, scrolling their phones, completely at ease. Nobody looked my way when I entered. Nobody needed to. Everyone thought this was closure. When the judge entered and called us to order, I sat with my attorney, hands folded in my lap. The lawyers moved quickly, ticking down a list of items like they were finishing a grocery run. Asset division, per the agreement, finalized. Custody and visitation, uncontested. Debts and obligations. That's when the judge paused. She adjusted her glasses and glanced down at a specific section in the stack of documents. Her brow furrowed, just slightly. "This clause, line 47B, she said. "Who added this?" Her lawyer straightened. "That was part of the mutual agreement package, added during the final draft stage, per Your Honor's guidance regarding asset assumption." The judge didn't look up. She kept reading, lips pressed together. My lawyer didn't speak. Neither did I. Clause 47B transfers not only ownership of shared assets, the judge said slowly, but also all associated liabilities, maintenance costs, outstanding taxes, and pending state reviews for the secondary LLC, as well as any legal claims tied to its previous contracts. My wife shifted in her chair. "What LLC?" Her lawyer cleared his throat. "That should have been disclosed." "It was," I said evenly. She turned to me, confused, then frustrated. "No, it wasn't. That was your consulting thing, not part of our shared—" "We filed jointly the first 2 years," I replied. "Your signatures on the first 3 deals. You wanted it that way for the tax benefit." The room went still. Her father leaned forward. "What does this mean?" The judge set the papers down and folded her hands. "It means the party receiving everything is also receiving the full financial and legal responsibilities tied to those assets. That includes debts, obligations, and pending evaluations." Her mother looked from me to her daughter, trying to process it. "Is this some trick?" my wife asked, voice sharper now. "You're trying to dump something on me after the fact?" My attorney finally spoke, quiet and calm. "It's not after the fact. It's in the signed agreement, pages 12 through 15, initialed by all parties." The silence that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity. No one laughed, no one smiled. Her parents sat motionless, as if a rope had been cut from above and no one had caught it. She looked down at the papers in front of her, flipping pages now, scanning for something she hadn't seen. I could almost see the moment it hit her, not just what the clause meant, but that she had skipped it, or skimmed it. Or assumed it didn't matter? Her voice was low. You let me sign that. I met her eyes. You insisted everything go through. No changes. Her lawyer, pale now, reached for his copy. We may need to file an amendment. The judge shook her head. This hearing is for final confirmation, not renegotiation. Both sides had ample opportunity for review. The room felt sealed, like we'd all just run out of oxygen. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. They had been so sure they understood the story, so eager to close the book. They hadn't realized the last few pages were never written by them. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. Final agreement confirmed. Her voice was firm, unemotional. My name was called, then hers. We both nodded. I said, "Yes, I understand." Clearly, without hesitation. She didn't speak. When the session adjourned and people began to stand, her parents still hadn't moved. Her lawyer was already whispering at her side. I walked out quietly. No smirk, no comment. Just my steps echoing against the hallway tile. As we stood to leave, I realized winning didn't feel like I thought it would. The cold air hit like a quiet reminder that real life didn't wait for verdicts. The afternoon had turned gray, the kind of Midwest gray that doesn't promise rain, just a flat, heavy sky. I paused on the steps, watching people pass by, briefcases in hand, coffee cups, coats tucked against the wind. Their lives moved forward while mine had just shifted course, silently. There were no handshakes, no backslaps. No one stood by to congratulate me or say I'd done the right thing. And truth be told, I didn't expect that. I wasn't sure I wanted it. I walked toward the parking lot alone, keys in hand, footsteps echoing lightly against the pavement. Behind me, muffled voices spilled from the courthouse entrance. Hers, her parents, their lawyer. They weren't shouting, not yet. But the tightness in their tones told its own story. Whatever calm they'd brought into that room had unraveled by the time they crossed the threshold. I didn't look back. Once in my car, I didn't turn on the radio. I let the silence stretch. The kind that isn't awkward, just necessary. Back at the apartment, the late afternoon light filtered through the thin blinds. The place looked the same as when I'd left. Shoes by the door, dishes in the drying rack, a drawing from my son still taped to the fridge. But it felt different now, like the walls weren't pressing in anymore. I set my coat on the chair and saw it again. The hoodie, folded neatly on the back of the couch. The same one my son had left there days ago. For some reason, I'd let it sit, untouched. But now I picked it up, opened the drawer, and placed it inside with care. Not as a chore, as a choice. I sat for a while, letting the day settle in my bones. No TV, no scrolling. Just a quiet moment where I could finally exhale. A knock came at the door a little after 6. My son stepped in with his backpack slightly unzipped, jacket half off, like usual. His mom had dropped him off without saying a word, just a nod in the car window. "Hey," he said. "Hey, buddy." He kicked off his shoes and flopped onto the couch, already asking if we had pasta. We did. After dinner, we sat across from each other on the rug, a half-built Lego city between us. He didn't ask about the courthouse, didn't ask who won. He asked something better. "Are we okay now?" I looked at him, not past him. "Yeah," I said without thinking twice. "We're okay." And in that moment, I meant it. Later that night, after he was asleep, I stood in the doorway of his room. His breathing was slow, deep, the kind of peaceful that you don't fake, the kind that tells you maybe, just maybe, the storm didn't reach everyone. I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from a friend, someone who hadn't picked sides, who had just checked in every now and then. "Heard it's over. How you holding up?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed back slowly, "Still here." Because that was the part they hadn't counted on. Not her, not her parents, not the lawyers who framed everything in terms of who got what and how fast. They assumed I'd fade, fall apart, go silent, but I hadn't. I'd stayed. I'd listened. I'd endured. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. And I hadn't disappeared. There were losses, of course. Some connections that wouldn't recover. Some truths I'd learned that couldn't be unlearned. But what I'd kept, what I'd protected, was real. My son. My peace. My name. And that was enough. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is walk away without shouting and let the truth speak later.